I think we are live. Let's do a quick sound check. Give me a minute. I hear birds. I think we're good. All right. Well, that's good. Well, good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, depending on what part of the globe you're on and what time zone you are in. I think we're okay. Let's see. Let's see if my computer can handle two different streams. Never done this before. Okay. All systems seem to be going well. All right. Well, I guess we'll continue with the reading of The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American by Andrew L. Seidel. One thing I was going to bring up. Let's see if my computer will let me. There it goes. All right. This is what I wanted to bring up today. I don't know if you can see that. Let me try to share my screen here. There we go. Yeah, so by now, I think everybody has seen this video, or at least you've seen this picture on the right-hand side. This happened 2 days ago by now. This is what do we call this? What can we really call this? With any, honesty. If we're going to be really honest with ourselves, what would we say this is? I mean, words fail me. Words fail me. It's just, I just, this is just beyond ridiculous. Come to find out, this man, if you look at the bottom right hand of this picture, you'll see this guy's face. This guy is in terror. This guy is just, you could just see the sheer terror in his eyes. And it makes this picture on the left, it kind of brings it to light, doesn't it? It kind of makes you understand why the person on the left hand is kneeling. So many of my fellow countrymen, white people, took offense to Colin Kaepernick kneeling. And forgive me, I do not know the name of this gentleman that is kneeling, that is getting his neck crushed by this jackass who dares to call himself a police officer. I cannot remember the names. The only thing I know is this guy on the ground. He's a civil rights lawyer, activist lawyer. That was what he specialized in. How ironic that this piece of shit is crushing this guy's throat. As this guy is handcuffed in this picture. He's got his hands behind his back. He's already cuffed. This jackoff has his hand in his pocket. Just nonchalantly putting his knee on the throat of this guy, just choking the life out of him. Now, you can't see the caption, but the caption is, "I can't breathe." This is one of the last sentences we'll ever hear of this man utter. And we wonder why people like Colin Kaepernick took the knee. Who incidentally took the advice of Colin Kaepernick. The reason he started taking the knee is because a special forces officer who was I don't think he was active duty at the time. I think he may have been honorably discharged. A Green Beret suggested, "Hey, why don't you start taking the knee? Why don't you start taking the knee? And this can be your form of protest." And this is how Colin Kaepernick decided to protest the police brutality, the using of basically the armed police officers using the African American community as target practice. This is what Colin Kaepernick was protesting. Ironic, isn't it? This is what he was protesting. This right here. This dirty fucking piece of shit asshole with a badge and a gun and half a dozen other weapons at his disposal. Mace, taser, who knows how many clips. Fucking douchebag. I saw a picture of this officer out of uniform wearing a red hat that said, "Make America white again." Make America white again. My question to you, Officer Douchebag, and I hate to besmirch the name of douches because douchebags actually perform a valuable service. Douches are actually, I mean, they have their use. You, sir, have none. So to call you a douchebag would actually degrade douches. So I'll refrain from calling you a douche. You, sir, are everything that is wrong with this country. Make America white again. Look at these fucking arms. How the fuck? This guy is an alcoholic inbred motherfucker. How the fuck? This guy couldn't even bench his own weight. And this picture was taken by somebody screaming at him saying, "Get off of him. What are you doing? Get off of him." And he's just sitting there, meh. And there's an officer to the left of this vehicle on the left-hand side watching, looking down. Didn't do a thing. The paramedics, when they showed up, literally had to check. They had to put their hand under his knee to feel a pulse. This guy, this motherfucker, was still kneeling on his neck when the paramedics showed up. He had already become unconscious. Yes, make America white again. Since when was this country white ever? In the history of ever, when was this country ever white? When? When? Certainly not the founding. If memory serves, there were quite a few Native American Indians still living around. In fact, the founding fathers depended on the Native American Indians for trade. A lot of trade took place between Native American Indians that lived on agreed plots of land close to the colonies, and sometimes directly in the colonies. So it wasn't the founding. Wasn't during the 1800s, 100 years later. In the 1800s, you had a lot of people of color, just like this guy, fresh off the plantation. 1876. Let's see. Oh, math was hardly that was, I want to say 12, 13 years after the Civil War. A lot of racism. No doubt about that. Country still ain't white, sir. How about the turn of the century, early 1900s? Was America white then? They did their damnedest. Jim Crow, lynchings. Yeah, good times, right? I bet you you get a hard on reading those old lynching stories, stories of strange fruit, picnics, the origin of, well, I don't know if I want to say the origin of picnics, but picnics in the early 1900s basically centered around Deep South hanging a person of color for whatever grievance they concocted, lynched them right there. And then they'd sit down and have a picnic lunch while the man or woman hung from the tree. That's where the term strange fruit comes from. Strange fruit indeed. Billie Holiday sang a song about that. She even wrote a song about southern trees bear strange fruit, I think it was. So I'm still, okay, let's fast forward. 1950s. This guy's grandparents probably one of them was probably in the World War II, Korean War. How about Vietnam? Sorry, America still ain't white. When was America white? I wish I had a picture of that. This fucking asshole wearing that red hat. Make America white again. I'm starting to see why, well, I can see why black people just do not care for white people. There's a mistrust there. There's a sense of just unease. I can see why people like Colin Kaepernick take the knee. It's because of assholes like you and people that support and enable you by not saying anything. 4 officers, including this asshole, got fired the next day. If there had been no footage, I'm telling you right now, if there had been no video footage, I guarantee you they wouldn't have gotten any more than maybe administrative leave while the police department did an internal investigation. Fuck. The FBI had to get involved for stuff to happen. Bullshit like this. Bullshit like this. No, sir, I don't want America ever to be white. I'll tell you something else. I am getting sick and tired of white people. They're starting to piss me off. If it's not one fucking thing, it's another. We're gonna get as good as we give. We keep carrying on like this, and this bullshit. Woman in a park calls the police on a black man because the black man dared to tell her to put her dog on a leash. This woman who knew better was walking her dog without a leash on in a public park. And all he dared to say was, "You need to put your dog on a leash." I'm going to call the police because I feared for my life. As she's fucking around on her phone, you could see the dog is getting choked. Thankfully, that dog is back in the pound or in the animal shelter where he came from. But holy fucking shit. This bullshit needs to stop. Getting angry because a Mexican family's in the park playing Mexican music. Getting upset because somebody tells you to put your dog on a leash like you should have been doing. And then this fucking story. Killing another person of color. What? I mean, the guy is restrained. He's got his hands behind his back. Oh, what a disgusting. You know what? I'll even go a step further. I will gladly take all of the undocumented illegal workers in this country over people like this piece of shit. Let's deport these motherfuckers and we'll keep the undocumented workers. How about that? You fucking asshole. You piece of shit. I don't know what else to add to that. Really fucking don't. Unfucking real. Another black man is dead. And he's a civil rights attorney. You can't get any more ironic than that. This is irony. I mean, this is just blows my mind. This goes beyond irony. The very thing he's fighting against is crushing the breath out of him. I mean, fucking A. Now, congratulations. Congratulations, America. Unfucking real. And this is why they protest. This is why they protest. It's just right. Yeah, right. How dare you? You can't protest like that. Yeah, you can't protest like that. That's what do they call that? What do they call that? You're allowed to protest peacefully. But when they protest peacefully, like they've been doing, they get yelled at. They get made fun of on Fox News. You can't protest like that. It's just, you can't do that. Fucking idiots. That's okay. I'm just so sick of white people. So fucking sick to death. This bullshit. Just unmitigated, just unreal. This is not the America I want to see. Absolutely not. Fucking idiots. I would say a few more choice words, but I'm afraid I would get banned. Well, anyway, thanks for joining my stream. I apologize. I know, I'm sorry. I make no apologies. Fuck that. This is a no fucks given stream. Yep, no fucks given. Okay, anyway, so continuing with Andrew Seidel's The Founding Myth, Chapter 3, Declaring Independence from Judeo-Christianity. Let's start out with a quote from John Adams. This radical change in the principles, opinions, and sentiments and affections of the people was the real American Revolution. This was in 1818, he wrote this. This radical change in the principles, opinions, and sentiments and affections of the people was the real American Revolution. Think about it. They had to really, what the founding fathers did was they had to literally change the American people from thinking of the divine right of kings to, hey, we can do this on our own. We don't need the king. Christian nationalists often argue that the Declaration of Independence embodies Judeo-Christian principles. And as it is one of our founding documents, they claim that our nation is Judeo-Christian because of the Declaration's religious language, specifically the 4 references that many read as invoking a supernatural power, the laws of nature and of nature's God, endowed by their creator, supreme judge of the world, and divine providence. The truth is both subtler and more exciting. The independence of America consists merely as a separation from England would have been a matter of but little importance, wrote Thomas Paine. He is correct. The Declaration was not just about political separation, nor did it establish a new country. Rather, independence was important, as Paine again correctly observed, because it was accompanied by a revolution in the principles and practices of governments. The Declaration of Independence gave voice to the most important shift in political thought in history. but it did not establish a new nation, a government, or a legal system. The Declaration dissolved the political bands that connected the colonies to Great Britain. It did not create, it severed, which is far simpler than nation building. It is much easier to pull down a government in such a conjuncture of affairs as we have seen than to build up, remarked John Adams. The Constitution, not the Declaration, created our government and laws. In fact, the Declaration cannot even properly be said to have severed the connection with Great Britain. It simply announced the separation. 2 days before the Declaration was adopted, the Continental Congress approved Richard Henry Lee's resolution, which John Adams had seconded, and these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. That they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. The vote that approved Lee's resolution 12-0, with New York abstaining, actually severed the political ties. If the Declaration of Independence didn't create a new nation, and it didn't technically declare independence, what was its point? Nearly 50 years after he drafted it, Jefferson wrote about the objects of the Declaration of Independence. It was not to find a new principle, not to find out new principles or new arguments never before thought of, or to say things which have never been said before. It was meant to place before mankind the common sense of the subject in terms so plain and firm as to command their assent. It did not aim at originality or principle or sentiment, but simply it was intended to be an expression of the American mind. Carl Becker, the American historian who wrote the book on the subject, The Declaration of Independence, A Study in the History of Political Ideas, 1922, thought that the primary purpose of the Declaration was not to declare independence, but to proclaim to the world the reason for declaring independence. It was intended to formally justify an act already accomplished. It was a justification, and as part of that justification, it laid out a political philosophy. That philosophy was not new, but Jefferson's formulation of it was more beautiful, simpler, and more powerful than any previously and perhaps since written. The central pillar of this political philosophy, that governments are instituted for and by the people, had never been fully put into practice, but it would be enshrined in the first 3 words of the Constitution 11 years later, and then carved into the American mind forever: we, the people. The Declaration of Independence had several purposes, but above all, it was written to persuade. It needed to convince a candid world that the colonies had a moral and legal right to separate from Great Britain. According to Becker, it also needed to unite the colonies, to meld them into one people by influencing public opinion. Independence would also allow the colonies to treat and trade with other countries. Finally, it may have been a bit of an attempt to convince a king who believed himself to be a Christian hero and the spiritual head of a church to end hostilities, not to reconcile, but to stop the war. And it, or at least the philosophy it laid out, was something of a repudiation of the divine right of kings. The first 2 purposes, severing the connection with Great Britain and unifying the colonies, are best understood if treated together, because Jefferson accomplished both by explaining the American political philosophy and applying that philosophy to the colonial situation. He took that theoretical construct and put it into concrete terms involving real people. The bulk of the Declaration's 1,300 plus words it dedicated to listing the grievances against the king. But before Jefferson indicted George, he described the logic and political theory on which the case against George would rest. The theory is twofold. First, despotic governments can and should be overthrown. Second, people are the source of governmental power and must consent to their government. This is a philosophy of rebellion against arbitrary power and of self-government. Jefferson wanted the Declaration to be the signal to burst the chains under which monkish ignorance and superstition had persuaded men to bind themselves and to assume the blessing and security of self-government. As that language indicates, and as we'll see, that philosophy makes the Declaration thoroughly anti-biblical. These 2 philosophical prongs, rebellion and self-government, line up nicely with the Declaration's primary purposes, severing political ties and uniting the colonies. After spelling out these truths, Jefferson then fit the British-American relationship within his two-pronged philosophy. The first 274 words, beginning with "when in the course of human events," and continuing until "it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security," say nothing about Britain or the colonies. Neither is mentioned until the end of the second paragraph, after the philosophy has been laid out. As Professor Stephen Lucas has observed, the Declaration argues by syllogism. Jefferson argues his major premise first, and Britain's violation of that second premise. Major premise: because governments are instituted to protect citizens' rights, people have a right and a duty to throw off despotic governments and to create new guards for these rights. Minor premise: the British government is despotic, and the following 28 charges show. Conclusion: therefore, the American people have a right and a duty to throw off British rule. The heavy lifting is done up front. The catalog of crimes validates the end result, but the important ideals and legal rationales come first. Those are the revolutionary purposes of the Declaration. But there were other purposes as well, including gaining foreign recognition and support. 2 years of embargoes and war were destroying the American economy and trade. Most of the delegates to the Continental Congress regarded the Declaration as a ceremonial confirmation of what had already occurred, writes Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Joseph J. Ellis, adding, "Its chief practical value, apart from publicizing a foregone conclusion in lyrical terms, was to enhance the prospects of a wartime alliance with France and all the revolutionary leaders under the French alliance to be the urgent issue at the time. After all, who were the colonies? They were distant, rebellious outposts of a vast, powerful empire. At least that is what other monarchs and countries would believe. What ruler would treat or trade with a group of rogue colonies?" Virginia Continental Congress George Wythe raised this issue a few months before July 1776. But other things are to be considered. Before such a measure is adopted, in what character shall we treat? As subjects of Great Britain? As rebels? Why should we be so fond of calling ourselves dutiful subjects? If we should offer our trade to the court of France, would they take notice of it any more than if Bristol or Liverpool should offer theirs, while we profess to be subjects? No, we must declare ourselves a free people. Samuel Adams worried about this as well. No foreign power can consistently yield comfort to rebels or enter into any kind of treaty with these colonies till they declare themselves free and independent. The colony's instructions to delegates on the Continental Congress in Philadelphia show that acquiring foreign aid was an important aim of the Declaration. North Carolina empowered its delegates in April 1776 to concur with the delegates of the other colonies in declaring independency and forming foreign alliances. If the colonies wished to continue the war, if they wished to restore and revive trade, they needed a treaty with a foreign power, negotiating one requiring declaring independence and achieving legitimacy as a state. The Declaration helped accomplish the first, and Jefferson started the process in the first sentence, when he listed the British and Americans as two separate people, necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another. That treatment, the obvious yet somehow subtle differentiation between two peoples, was a powerful announcement to the world. Yet one more purpose was to unite the colonies in the war against Britain. In 1776, the citizens would come to be known as the American people were divided. Some were committed to independence, some were opposed, and some were wavering despite the convincing arguments in Thomas Paine's Common Sense. King George issued an ultimatum. The colonies must either submit or triumph. There was no turning back. If Patrick Henry did, in fact, proclaim, "Give me liberty or give me death," he was right. The choice was to win or die, or as Franklin put it, join or die. But the people had to be convinced. Adams, Jefferson, Washington, Franklin, and other founders were traitors in the eyes of the king. The Declaration essentially put every citizen on the enemy's list. As Franklin may have said, we must indeed all hang together, or most assuredly, we shall all hang separately. Looking back on the Revolution 40 years later, John Adams wrote about why unification was such a monumental task. The colonies had grown up under constitutions of government so different. There was no great variety of religions. They were composed of so many different nations. Their customs, manners, and habits had so little resemblance, and their intercourse had been so rare, and their knowledge of each other so imperfect, that to unite them in the same principles and theory and the same systems of action was certainly a very difficult enterprise. The complete accomplishment of it in so short a time and by such a simple means was perhaps a singular example in the history of mankind. 13 clocks were made to strike together, a perfection of mechanism which no artist had ever before effected. The Declaration may also have been an attempt to convince the man who was both a Christian king and the head of the Church of England to stop an unjust war. King George III was not only the titular head of the Church of England, but also a faithful and active supporter. Ecclesiastical debates raged in England during the 1700s, and they helped to bind George's religiosity to his political views, particularly with respect to the American colonies. His opposition to the Revolutionary War stemmed, at least in part, from his opposition to religious heterodoxy. George conflated morality with the ideal of a Christian people led by a Christian king, according to a biographer, Jeremy Black. Throughout the Revolution, George believed that his God would give him strength and protection, writing, I begin to see that I shall soon have infused some of that spirit which I think heaven ever attends me when under difficulties. I trust in the protection of the Almighty, in the justness of the cause, the uprightness of my own intentions. Black explains that George took his role and God-given responsibility as supreme governor of the church very seriously. He was devout, was known for his personal piety, and thought that his God intervened in this world. So he governed according to what he saw as his God's will. In theory, the divine right of kings was abandoned in England when the Glorious Revolution, 1688 to 89, dethroned the Stuarts. James Wilson, Scottish immigrant, founding father, and one of the original 6 Supreme Court justices, said as much in the Pennsylvania Ratifying Convention. Is the executive power of Great Britain founded on representation? This is not pretended. Before the Glorious Revolution, many of the kings claimed to reign by divine right, and others by hereditary right. Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Algernon Sidney had all penned devastating critiques of the divine right, but the idea was still embraced in many quarters. As Becker notes, in that day, kings were commonly claiming to rule by divine right, and according to this notion, there would be no right of rebellion. The more religious a monarch, the more likely he would be to think a god had assigned him his rightful place as ruler. The idea that all people are created equal is not a religious idea. The idea that some people are special or chosen is one that various religious groups have embraced throughout history. The entire Hebrew Bible is about the chosen people. Religion promotes elitism, not equality. So too, the divine right of kings elevated one individual or family over an entire nation. In the Declaration, Jefferson wrote that when a government becomes despotic, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. But despite the Christian nationalist argument to the contrary, self-government and revolution against tyranny are not principles derived from Christianity or the Bible. Depends on your hermeneutics, I think. The Declaration of Independence is an anti-Christian document with snippets of religious-sounding language as window dressing. If Jefferson and the other revolutionaries had been devout Christians, they never would have rebelled. The Declaration would have never been written, and America's political relationship to the United Kingdom today would resemble Canada's. The Christian Bible stands directly opposed to the Declaration's central ideas, including that it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish their government and to institute a new government. Paul's letter to the Romans demonstrates this opposition. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. Paul claims that governments are instituted for men by God, and that rebelling against the government is rebelling against his God. Paul continues, and again, he is explicit. For the one in authority is God's servant for your God. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authority, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. Paul could not have been clearer. Rulers like King George III must be obeyed as a matter of conscience. The colonies would have nothing to fear so long as they obeyed their ruler. With such threats, it is a wonder that the divine right of kings was ever overturned. If the ruler is not obeyed, if the people revolt, then they will be killed. Such passages are not outliers. They are more in both the Christian and Hebrew Bibles. In the Christian Bible, we learn that the biblical God must be obeyed first and earthly rulers second. We must obey God rather than any human authority. But the God is also telling followers to obey earthly rulers. The Hebrew Bible says, by me kings reign and rulers decree what is just. By me rulers rule and nobles, all who govern rightly. All who govern rightly. I guess it depends on what Bible you read and how you interpret it. Eh? This theology is alive and well in Christian nationalism. In what one journalist labeled a stunning expression of Christian nationalism. President Donald Trump's closest evangelical advisor, Paula White, reiterated these passages to diffuse the constant and justified criticism that Trump is vulgar and undignified. They say about our president, well, he is not our president. Thank goodness. He is not a polished politician. In other words, he is authentically, whether people like it or not, has been raised up by God, because God says that he raises up and places all people in places of authority. It is God who raises up a king. It is God who sets one down. When you fight against the plan of God, you are fighting against the hand of God. Paula White's words and these Bible verses exhibit a servility entirely foreign to the Declaration of Independence, which embodies contrary ideas. The political philosophy on which the Declaration is based says people have a duty to throw off absolutist governments. Altering the government is at once a necessity, a duty, and a right. Jefferson says that it is necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and speaks of the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. Right necessities and duties, not obedience, sin, and submission. John Adams put it with his customary bluntness in Article 7 of the Massachusetts Constitution's Declaration of Rights. The people alone have an incontestable, unalienable, and indefeasible right to institute government and to reform, alter, or totally change the same. Not a God, but the people alone. Enemies of colonial independence relied on the divine authority of governments. John Lind, an English barrister, refuted the Declaration in a 1776 pamphlet. Lind pointed out that the Declaration does not, indeed cannot, rely on any law of God. Quote, what difference these acute legislators suppose between laws of nature and of nature's God is more than I can take upon me to determine or to even guess. If to what they now demand they were entitled by any law of God, they had only to produce that law, and all controversy was at an end. Instead of this, what do they produce? What they call self-evident truths. All men, they tell us, are created equal. How ironically correct this barrister of England it was. How accurate. How right. What law? What law could you cite? What scriptural principle could you rely on to support the Declaration of Independence? This barrister has a point. Jefferson could not rely on any law of God because the laws of God opposed the principles he relied on. Robert Boucher was an Anglican minister and a Maryland loyalist who moved to England before independence. Like Paula White, he relied on the Bible to support the divine right of kings, writing that it is the uniform doctrine of the scriptures that is under the deputation and authority of God alone and the king's reign. Far from deriving their authority from any supposed consent or suffrage of men, they receive their commission from heaven. They receive it from God, the source of all power. He relied on the Bible to argue against American independence. Declaring independence was against his God's law because obedience to government is every man's duty, though it is particularly incumbent on Christians because it is enjoined by the positive commands of God. And therefore, when Christians are disobedient to human ordinances, they are also disobedient to God. No matter how repressive the government, Boucher argued, it is our duty not to disturb and destroy the peace of the community by becoming refractory and rebellious subjects and resisting the ordinance of God. According to Boucher, the Bible never even discusses government except to say that it must be obeyed, not rebelled against. The only circumstance relative to government for which the scriptures must be particularly solicitous, it is inculcating obedience to lawful government or governors. The Bible undercut the American cause. This is why the American Revolution never quite sat well with me while I was a Christian. Yes, the jingoism is all well and good. Yes, isn't it grand that we rebelled against England and we got our independence, right? But yet, reading the Bible, submitting to government, this is what the Bible advocates. Since when has God ever encouraged the uprising and overthrow of government? When in the history of ever? Now, I guess you could go to the Old Testament in the book of Judges, where God raised up a judge to fight the Philistines or fight the Assyrians or fight the Syrians. But again, you would be hard pressed to try to make that apply to today. Oh my goodness. Anyway, the Declaration does not require blind obedience. The Bible and the biblical God do. God takes away everything Job has. He kills his children, bankrupts him, sets his skin afire with boils. Job bears his train of abuse by continuing to worship God. This is precisely the opposite of what the declaration demands. When a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces and designed to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off. For the founders, King George III was akin to the biblical God in this situation, abusing the colonies and expecting blind obedience in return. Religions, particularly established religions or religions to which a majority of the population ascribe, will nearly always oppose revolution because revolution upsets the status quo in which they are powerful. This also means that religion will usually fight progress, as can be seen across history. From flat earthers to geocentrists to young earth creationists, from the index of prohibited books to book burning to declaring one and only one book, the Book of Truth, from outlawing pain relief during childbirth to banning contraception to preventing women from taking control of procreation, from exorcisms to opposing vaccines to stem cell research, from validating slavery to enslaving women in the home, to prohibiting same-sex marriage, to religious persecution of Socrates, Hypatia, Galileo, Giordano Bruno, Spinoza, and Charles Darwin. There's a few names in here I take umbrage with, but that's neither here nor there. Galileo was not persecuted because his ideas threaten the church. Okay. Galileo was persecuted because he was using the Bible to justify his scientific theories, his calculations, basically his book. Exactly what the Catholic Church did not want. The Catholic Church did not want Galileo to, just to take it a step further, the Catholic Church basically commissioned Galileo to write, to basically to replace the current model of the universe and what or our solar system, which Galileo did. Okay, but he used the Bible in his writings to justify his scientific theory. The Catholic Church did not want that at all, and for good reason. So people who say, "Oh, well, they treated Galileo so badly," yes and no. So you got to take all the history. So Andrew Seidel is only looking at a very small portion of history when it comes to Galileo. When it comes to Bruno, what's interesting, Bruno was thought of as a scientific quack, and indeed he was. I don't advocate for him to be burned to death, but Galileo, in his letter, he wrote to another scientist, I forgot his name, but Galileo was excited that Bruno was burned to death. He was like, "Oh, thank God he's gone." So, say what you want, but none of Bruno's works or his assertions were confirmed by any of the scientific of any of academia. Even Galileo knew that Bruno was a quack. He was not a scientist by any stretch of the imagination. I forgot some of the examples that were cited, but there's an awesome website that actually details why they came out so strongly against Bruno. Again, I don't advocate that he should have been burned to death, but he would have been at least shunned by all of academia at that time, including Galileo. Galileo wanted nothing to do with Bruno. In fact, he was excited that he was burned to death. Anyway, that's a segue. Doesn't matter. The founders had first-hand experiences here. Progress threatens religion. This was true for all and well known to the founders. Ben Franklin was renowned in his time for snatching lightning from the sky and the scepter from tyrants, until he invented the lightning rod. Ringing church bells, specially baptized with water from the Jordan River, were used to ward off lightning. This practice, which required humans to grasp a connection to a hunk of metal atop the highest structure in a town, killed more than 120 bell ringers from 1750 to 1784. Shit. But this was still believed to be effective. Many Christians did not believe humans had a right to defend themselves from divine attacks. Ab Nollet, a man of the church, deemed it as impious to ward off heaven's lightnings as for a child to ward off the chastening rod of its father. Franklin retorted that the thunder of heaven is no more supernatural than the rain, hail, or sunshine of heaven against the inconvenience of which we guard by roofs and shades without scruple. Interesting. When organized Christianity failed to stop the spread of the useful invention, it blamed other natural phenomena, such as the 1755 Boston earthquake, on Franklin's rods. John Adams condemned the religious opposition to Franklin's rods, writing that they met with all the opposition from the superstition, affectation of piety and jealousy of new inventions, that inoculation to prevent the danger of the smallpox and all other useful discoveries have met with in all ages of the world. Franklin's unholy inventions was a blessing to humanity with the mind of a man, and religion fought it at every step. Scientific, political, and social progress all threaten religion, which is why the Bible demands blind obedience. Do not revile the king, even in your thoughts. First to its God and then to the state. God, even as only an idea, is a millstone around the neck of a society, not an engine of progress. Abigail and John Adams' first son, John Quincy Adams, may have first reinforced the Declaration as embodying the people's rights, their duty to rebel against tyrannical governments, in a speech before Congress. As a member of the House of Representatives from Massachusetts, an office he held for 9 terms, after only a single term as president, Adams waged a lonely war against slavery. In 1836, the slaveholding states had successfully imposed a gag rule, the origin of that term, to rebel against tyrannical governments, in a speech before Congress. As a member of the House of Representatives from Massachusetts, an office he held for 9 terms, after only a single term as president, Adams waged a lonely war against slavery. In 1836, the slaveholding states had successfully imposed a gag rule, the origin of that term, in the House, which essentially prohibited mentioning slavery. Adams rebelled against the rule as much as against slavery itself. On behalf of some constituents in 1842, he submitted a petition to dissolve the union of these states over Southern slavery. Harlow Giles Unger tells the story of ensuing parliamentary conflict in his biography of the younger Adams. Kentucky Congressman Thomas Marshall moved to censure John Quincy for having committed high treason when he submitted a petition for dissolution of the Union. Holy shit. Sir, John Quincy shot back, "What is high treason? The Constitution of the United States says what high treason is. It is not for the gentleman from Kentucky or his puny mind to define what high treason is, and confound it what I have done." John Quincy then ordered the clerk to read the first paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. Proceed, John Quincy thundered. Proceed, down to right and duty. The clerk continued. It is their right. Independence is based on a different idea, that governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. This is the very foundation of the self-government ideal, that an explicit rejection of a God-given government. That rejection is embodied and rather heavily emphasized in the first three words of the Constitution. We, the people. People give the government power and legitimacy, not God. The Constitution and the Declaration directly contradicts Christian principles of government and authority. In the Declaration, emphasizes people while minimizing the divine or supernatural. The first sentence alone proves that the Declaration's concern for humanity. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which are connected, which have connected them with another, and to assume among the power of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. The Declaration concerns human events, the powers of the earth, and the opinions of humanity, and only possible mention of the divine or the supernatural in the above sentence. Nature's God is, as discussed at length in chapter 4, not supernatural at all. When in the course of human events, as the political philosopher Matthew Stewart points out, alerts us that the event to be announced does not arise from any divine intercourse. The human and decidedly unsupernaturally bent continues with one people severing a political connection with another people and taking their place among the powers of the earth, not heaven, the earth. Stewart again gets it right. In this graceful opening sentence, the Declaration makes clear that the event to unfold and the reasons with which it will be explained are entirely circumscribed within the experience of this world. The entire document enshrines a political philosophy, that is, as Abraham Lincoln referred to it in the Gettysburg Address, of the people, for the people, and by the people. If we look at just the first two paragraphs, the emphasis on mankind and this world is evident. Set against the nature's God and their creator references, the humanity embedded in the Declaration is overwhelming. In words like human events, one people, another, mankind, powers of the earth, the opinions of mankind, all men, government are instituted among men, consent of the governed, in the rights of the people, to them, their safety, their happiness. All experience hath shown that mankind, to which they are accustomed, their right, their duty, their future security, these colonies, tyranny over the states, a candid world. The Declaration was written not to justify the separation to a God. It was written because the founders held a decent respect to the opinions of mankind and wished to change those opinions. Becker taught us that the founders and their forebears focused on human endeavor and accomplishment, elevating both. This is precisely what the 18th century did. With the lantern of enlightenment, it went up and down the field of human history, looking for man in general, the universal man stripped of the accidents of time and place. It wished immensely to meet humanity and to become intimate with the human race. If it could find humanity, it would have found man in general, the natural man, and so it would have some chance of knowing what were the rights and laws which, being suited to man in general, were more likely to be suited to particular men everywhere and always. The Declaration and principles it embodied and the political philosophy it outlined, and are truly thoroughly opposed to Judeo-Christian principles. And I have to agree. That is not to say that American preachers and religious leaders of the time do not advocate independence and revolution. Some did, but they did not. But they did so in spite of biblical constraints. Robert Boucher, the Anglican minister opposed to independence, chastised his godly brethren for this crime. Let a minister of God then stand excused if he seeks not to amuse you by any flowery panegyrics on liberty. Such panegyrics are the productions of ancient heathens and modern patriots. Okay, I'm sorry. Let me repeat that again. Such panegyrics are the productions of ancient heathens and modern patriots. Nothing of the kind is to be met with in the Bible. Preachers tortured biblical passages to fit their arguments, including independence. That is the preacher's job. But in truth, ministers preaching independence relied on natural, not supernatural law, just as the Declaration's author Thomas Jefferson. End of chapter 3. Chapter 4 is talking about the Declaration's references to a higher power. So he's going to get into more in depth on the philosophy therein. Wow. I have to say, what an awesome chapter that was. And he's right. You have to really torture the scriptures to make it fit your narrative. How true that is, that I will give him. All right, chapter 4 next week, hopefully. If I can get my dead ass going, I will definitely do it. All right, well, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. We'll talk to you all later. I will see you later, hopefully. But if I do, it'll definitely be later when I do. Take care, everybody. Stay safe. Stay healthy. All right. Take care.